Hello everyone, and welcome. I'm Jordan at Afterburner Automation, and today we're going to be walking through the first of 3 courses on the Excel Basic package. By the end of this course, you should be able to use the Excel Basic package to perform some simple interactions with Excel spreadsheets, such as opening, saving, and closing spreadsheets, as well as getting and setting the contents of specific cells. The Excel Basic package is one of 3 separate Excel packages, with the other 2 being Excel Advanced and Office 365 Excel. These packages are different in a few ways. First, they'll have slightly different features. While you can do most of the most common actions with Excel Basic, you can do the same actions and more with Excel Advanced and Office 365 Excel. The real difference is that Excel Basic can be used even if you don't have Excel installed on your machine. Excel Advanced requires it to be installed, and Office 365 Excel uses the online version of Excel that's included with Office 365. The biggest factor you'll need to consider when choosing which package to use is which version of Excel you have or don't have. But sometimes Excel Basic can be the right choice even if you do have Excel installed, because although it's limited, it does typically work much faster than the Excel Advanced package. However, the most important thing that you'll need to remember as you learn these packages is that they can't be used together. For instance, I can't use Excel Basic to open the file and then use Excel Advanced to manipulate it. If you're going to use an Excel package to work on a file, all of the commands you use need to be from the same package. But let's stop talking about it and get our hands on it. First, make sure that you log into the control room and navigate to the automation section like we've been doing. Then, navigate to the Citizen Developer folder and create a new subfolder called Excel Basic 101. Once you've created that folder, we're ready to get started. But before we get started, if you'd like to follow along and build this bot with me, you'll need to download the global sales data.xlsx file located in the resources section below this video player. For this bot, we'll be pretending that we work in administration for a global retailer. Our job is to take the file that I've provided to you and create individual regional sales data files for each region in the global file. So let's create a new bot and call it CD17-Regional Sales Data. Then, press Create and Edit to get to the RPA workspace. Before we get started building this bot, let's make sure we're set up with our global sales data.xlsx file. Let's open up File Explorer and then navigate to the desktop so that we can make a folder for this file to live in. Create a new folder, and we'll call it CD17-Regional Sales Data. Then, find where you downloaded your global sales data.xlsx file and move that file into our CD17 folder. This is where we'll get the Excel file for our bot in just a second. But let's also go ahead and open that file so that we can look at it while we work. Now, let's minimize this and go back to the RPA workspace. Let's start by getting the bot to open that file. We'll head over to the Actions sidebar and look for our new package, Excel Basic. There are quite a few actions inside, but let's grab the Open command so that we can open the file we just selected. Once we bring that command over to the main workspace, you'll see the options in the right sidebar. As you can see, the first option, File Path, has a couple of options. Control Room File allows you to select a file that's stored in the control room, and Variable allows you to select a file type variable, which we won't learn about until a later learning track. So let's select Desktop File, like we have been. From here, let's select Browse. When the Select File window appears, let's navigate to the desktop and then to the CD17-Regional Sales Data folder we created. Select the Global Sales Data.xlsx file and then click Open to return to the workspace. You can see that we now have the full path to our Excel file in the File Path field. Below that, there's a checkbox we can use if the sheet contains a header. While we do have a header in this sheet, I want to leave this box unchecked for now. This box is actually used in conjunction with a loop command that we don't know yet, so we'll skip that until I go over it in the Junior Developer track. Below that, there's a checkbox for specific sheet name. This checkbox allows us to open a specific sheet in the Excel file, but we'll skip that until the Advanced Developer track. Below that, we have the Open In option, which allows us to choose Read Only or Read Write mode. Read Only allows us to see what's in a file, while Read Write allows us not only to read what's in the file, but also to write new things to it. For our global sales data file, we don't want to change anything about it, so let's set this option to Read Only. There's also another checkbox here if a password's required, but we'll be skipping that until later as well. Finally, we need to look at the Create Excel Session option. This option allows us to give a name to our interactions with the Excel sheet that will be used for any other commands. The way this works is that we assign it a session name, and then any other Excel basic commands that we use will also need to use the same session name. This will allow us to work with multiple Excel files at once. We can even use the Global Session option to set a name that we can use across multiple bots, but for now, let's use the Local Session option. For the name, let's use the word Global in all caps so that it's easy to see and remember for future commands. Next, let's look at our opened global sales data file in Excel. We can see that there are 3 columns, and if we scroll down, we'll see that we have 101 rows. That's important, because we want to set up a loop that will look at each column and each row. There's a loop option that allows us to loop through each row of an Excel file, but for now, let's use one of the loop types we've already learned. Head back to the RPA workspace and then over to the Actions sidebar to find the loop package. Then, grab a loop command and drag it right underneath our Excel basic open command. As always, this is defaulting to the for in times loop, which is perfect, but this time, let's change the number of times it will loop to the number of rows in our spreadsheet, which is 101. Then, let's head down to the Assign the current value to a variable dropdown and use the Create Variable icon to the right to make a new variable called row count. This variable will hold the row number for each iteration of the loop, so that we can look at the items in each row. Now that our loop's set up, let's start getting each column's values into variables that we can use. For this, we can head back over to the Actions sidebar and go back to the Excel Basic package. Then, we can use the Get Single Cell command and drag that command out of the sidebar and inside of our loop. The Options sidebar shows Cell Option as its first option, which allows us to choose Active Cell or Specific Cell. I'll show you how to use the Active Cell a bit later, so for now, let's select Specific Cell. That allows us to put a specific cell address that we want to retrieve. This cell address needs to match the spreadsheet cell address, which starts with the column letter and ends with the row number. So if we wanted the top left cell, we could put A1 here. However, that would be really difficult to do 100 more times to get A2 through A101, so instead, let's use our row count variable. The row count variable is a number type variable, and as we can see by looking at the cell address field, there's a double quote icon, which means this field only accepts strings. We know from our loop course that we can convert our row count variable to a string by using the number to string command. So let's go to the Actions sidebar and navigate to the number package. Grab the toString command, then drag it into our loop right before the Get Single Cell command. For the Enter a Number field, let's press F2 and select our row count variable from the available options. Then, click on the Create Variable icon next to the Assign Output dropdown. Let's name this string version of row count as just row, so that it's easy to remember. Now, we can go back to the Get Single Cell command and click inside of the cell address field. Let's type A, because that's the column we need. Then, press F2 and select our row variable from the available options. This will allow us to grab a new row every time that we iterate through our loop. Then, we need to set a session name. Like I mentioned when we implemented the open command, we need this to be the same thing that we use to name our session in that open command. So let's put global in all caps. Finally, we need a variable to store the value in. So let's click the Create Variable icon next to the dropdown and call this variable region, since that's the name of the column. Now that we have one of the columns in a variable, we need to do two more. The easiest way will be to copy-paste this command twice. So click anywhere inside the main workspace, but off of the command so that that command saves the options we've already set. Then click on it again and press Ctrl-C. Then press Ctrl-V twice to paste it. Inside of each one, we're going to change the cell address field so that we're looking at the next column letter. So for this first one, we'll put B instead of A. Then we need to go back down to the Store Cell Contents dropdown and use the Create Variable icon to store the value in a variable with the same name as column B's header, which is country. Repeat that process again to set up the last variable now. For this new variable, we're going to store it in a value called total revenue. When you're done, you should be getting the cell value for columns A, B, and C, with each one storing that cell value in variables called region, country, and total revenue, respectively. Now that we're able to get all of the values from each column, we can start to put those values into the regional files. Our goal here is to create files for each region in the global spreadsheet, with each file containing the two other columns of data for that region. So let's start by checking if the region file already exists with an if command. We'll go to the Actions sidebar, look for the if package, and then drag an if command right below our last get single cell command, but make sure that the if command is inside of the loop. Here, we'll select the if file does not exist option. And once it pops up, we'll need to put a file path here. For now, let's copy the file path from our first Excel Basic Open command on line 1. After we paste it into our if command, let's delete the file name, cd17-global sales data, but leave the .xlsx. Then, we'll press F2 to replace it with a variable. Each file needs to be named after its own region, so let's select our region variable. Now our if command is ready to check if the file doesn't exist. At the beginning of the bot, it won't exist, so we'll need to create it with our headers. So let's use our file copy desktop file command by heading over to the Actions sidebar and searching for the file package. Bring the copy desktop file command over into the if command, and let's set our source file path as the path to our global sales data file from line 1. Then, we can copy the if command's file path to the destination file field. This will copy our global sales data file to a new file that's named after the region. But we need to open that file and delete everything except the 3 headers that we need. Let's bring another Excel Basic Open command over from the Actions sidebar. So head back over and look for the Excel Basic package. Grab that Open command and put it just after our Copy Desktop File command, but still inside of the If command. For the file path, we'll select Desktop File. Then we'll copy-paste the regional file path from our If command. We can again ignore the header and specific sheet options, but for the Open In option, since we'll be changing data in this file, let's select Read-Write Mode. This file won't have a password, so we can skip that as well, but for our Excel session, in the Local Session tab, let's press F2 and select our region variable. You might be wondering why we didn't do this in the Variable tab, and that's because that tab is specifically for session type variables, which we won't learn about until later. Anyway, now that our bot has opened this file, it'll look just like our global sales data file. We'll need to delete the region column as well as every row after the header row. So let's work on deleting that data by using the Excel Basic Delete Cells command. Drag that Delete Cells command over from the Actions sidebar and put it just below the Excel Basic Open command on line 9. You'll see that we have similar options to the Get Single Cell command here, with Active Cell and Specific Cell. For now though, let's use the Specific Cell option and set it to A1. We can then look at the Delete options and see what works best for us. These delete options allow us to delete a single cell and shift the resulting cells left or up, or we can delete the entire row or the entire column. We want the entire column gone, so let's select that option. We then need to change the session name from default to our region variable by deleting default and then pressing F2 and selecting it from the available options. Then we need to delete any data underneath the headers. We already know that there are a total of 101 rows if we include the header row, but we want to keep that row, so we'll want to delete 100 rows. Sounds like we could use a loop here to help us out, so let's go to the Actions sidebar and search for the loop package. Drag a loop command into our If command just below the Delete Cells command, and like before, we're already set up to use the for_in times loop. So let's change the number of times to 100 to reflect the number of rows we want to delete. In the past, we've also assigned the current value to a variable so that we could track the number of loops, but let's skip that so I can show you something a little different. We want to delete all 100 rows of data, so let's start with row 2. I'm going to go ahead and copy the Delete Cells command on line 10 and then paste it inside of our new inner loop. Earlier, we used this to delete the entire A column, but now we want to delete an entire row. Let's set our specific cell field to A2 so that we're looking at the second row. Then change the delete options to entire row. Now let's think about how our loop will work here. We have it looping 100 times, and each time it's deleting the entire row where A2 is found. When it deletes the row for the first time, that'll shift all the rows below it up one row, so the third row will now be the second row with A2. That means that by deleting the second row 100 times, we should be able to delete all the rows below the header. Pretty neat. Now we have a brand new Excel file made from a copy of global sales data and named after the current region. But with all of the data and the entire first column gone, let's make sure our work gets saved at this point by using the Excel Basic Save Workbook command. Head to the Actions sidebar and search for Excel Basic. Then we're going to keep an eye on that Save Workbook command. I want this to go inside of our if statement, but outside of our inner loop where we're looping 100 times. So let's go ahead and click on the caret to the left of our loop command on line 11 so that we can collapse that. Then drag the Save Workbook command just underneath that loop, but make sure that it's still inside of the if statement. Collapsing that loop command made it a little bit easier for us to drag this save workbook command inside of the if statement without accidentally putting it inside of the loop command. Anyway, all we need to do for this command is give it a session name. So let's delete the default session name and then press F2. Again, we'll select our region variable from the available options so that we're saving the file we're currently working on. Then, we need to think about what will happen next in our bot. Right now, we're looping through each row of the global sales data sheet and getting the values from each row. If we don't already have a file named after the current region, we're creating one by copying the global sales data file and deleting the first column and all of the data. So the next step is to log the data from the current row of global sales data to our regional sheet. But how do we do that? We can't use our row variable because we won't always be manipulating the same row number in our regional sheet as we would be looking at in our global sheet, so we'll need a different solution. Fortunately, we have the option to get and set values in a spreadsheet by the active cell, like we saw earlier. The active cell is the currently selected cell in a spreadsheet, and it can be different depending on what's selected in each spreadsheet. So we need to know for sure where the active cell is when we get to this point. If we think about it, after we build our spreadsheet by deleting all the data in the first column, the first empty cell will be right underneath our country header, which is cell A2. But how do we select that cell? This is where the Excel basic go to cell command comes in. Let's go back to the Actions sidebar and find that command, go to cell, in the Excel basic package. We'll drag that command over into our code, and let's make sure to put it right after our save workbook command, but still inside of the if command. This will guarantee that every single regional sheet we make will finish up its creation by going to the cell that we want it to. You'll see that we again have cell options here in the right sidebar of either specific cell or active cell. But we figured out already that we need to be at cell A2, so let's use the specific cell field and set that to A2. Then we need to set our session name again, so let's delete default, press F2, and select our region variable again from the appropriate options. Now our bot is set up so that any new file it creates will have cell A2 selected. So let's collapse our if command by clicking on the caret and start working on the next step. We need to set the active cell with the country value, and then set the cell to the right of the active cell with the total revenue value. We can use the Excel basic set cell command to get this done. So let's grab it from the Actions sidebar and drag it just below but outside of our collapsed if command. This command is used to set a value into a cell, and it lets us select either the active cell or a specific cell. Since we know that the active cell is set correctly at A2, let's leave that option as is, and then in Value to Set, click in that field and press F2. Then select our country variable. Finally, we need to change the session name to our region variable, so let's again delete default, press F2, and select that region variable again. But now we need to move over one cell to the right so that we can set the total revenue variable. For that, let's click on the caret to expand our if command so that we can see our go to cell command on line 14. Let's copy that command, then paste it below the set cell command on line 15. Right now, we have it going to a specific cell, but we want it to move one cell to the right. We could just change the specific cell to B2, but if we did that, any future set cell commands that we need on different rows would just continuously overwrite cell B2. So let's instead click on the active cell option and see what we can do. This unlocks a drop-down, and if we expand it, we'll see all kinds of options for cells to go to relative to our current active cell. We need to go one cell to the right, so let's select the option for that now. The session name is already set because we copied this command from elsewhere in our code, so we're good to go. Before moving on, let's collapse that if command on line 7 again to make our code a bit easier to read. Now that we've moved one cell to the right, we need to set that cell with the total revenue value. So let's copy our set cell command on line 15 and paste it below our new go to cell command on line 16. All we need to do here is change the value to set to our total revenue value. So let's delete the country variable, press F2, and select total revenue from the available options. Again, all of the other options are just how we want them since we copied this command from elsewhere. So now we're able to set the current row with 2 values, but what about the next time through the loop? We ended with our active cell 1 cell to the right, in B2, but if we loop again, it'll set the active cell with the country variable, as we can see on line 15. We want it to start at the beginning of the next row, so we need to make sure that our active cell is there. To do that, let's copy our go-to cell command on line 16 and paste it twice, just below the set cell command on line 17. We'll go ahead and select the command on line 18, and then let's look at our active cell dropdown again. It looks like we have an option to move to the beginning of the row, but we need to be on the next row, so let's first pick 1 cell below as the option here. Now that we've moved our active cell down a row, we can send it to the beginning of that row by selecting the go-to cell command on line 19 and setting the active cell dropdown to beginning of the row. Now we know for sure that each time through the loop, the bot will automatically set the active cell as the beginning of the next row once it's done with the current row. We're almost done here, but we need to do a couple cleanup tasks. First, you might notice that we used open commands to open the global file, as well as all of the regional files, but we never closed them. Closing a file is not 100% necessary, but it can cause problems with more complex bots, because when we use the open command, it literally creates a connection between A360 and your Excel file. If we don't use the close command to sever that connection, then you can find yourself experiencing some strange issues that are extremely difficult to track down. With that in mind, let's head back over to the Actions sidebar and grab an Excel Basic Close command. Then, drag it over just below our last command, but still inside of the loop. When the options pop up in the right sidebar, we can see that we have the option to save our changes when we close the file, which is perfect. Let's leave that checked. Then, let's delete the default session name, press F2, and put in our region variable. Let's think about this for a second. If we close our file here on line 20, the next time it needs to work on that file, it won't be open for us to use. The only time that we opened it was inside of our if command, so our file will only be open if it didn't exist on this iteration of the loop. So we need to make sure that our file is open before it starts setting the cell on line 15. To do that, let's expand our if command on line 7 and copy the open command on line 9. Then, let's paste it outside of the if command, but right before we start setting the cell on line 15. This can be a little bit difficult, because if we paste it after line 14, it'll automatically be inside of the if command, which we can tell because it's indented. It's an easy fix though. We just need to click and hold on that command, then drag it slightly to the left so that the indentation lines line up with the commands outside of the if command. Perfect. Now, we're opening our file each time, but we still have a problem because we never closed the file after opening it the first time inside of our if statement. That's also an easy fix though. All we need to do is close the file inside of that if command. To do that, let's make it nice and easy by copying our close command on line 21. Then, paste it after our go-to cell command on line 14, but still inside of the if statement. Now we're opening the file when we need it and closing it when we're done, but we still need to close the global file too. Let's copy one of our close commands. Then, paste it at the end of our bot, just after line 22. We'll need to uncheck the Save Changes box, because we opened this file in read-only mode, and it'll throw an error if we try to save a read-only file. We also need to change this close command's session variable to the same session variable we used when we opened the global file. So let's delete the region variable and type in global in all caps. This command got pasted inside of our outer loop though,
which would close it each time we looped, and that'll cause a problem when we try to use our get single cell commands on lines 4 through 6. To fix that, let's drag that final close command slightly to the left so that it's no longer indented. We can tell that it's outside of the loop by collapsing the loop command on line 2 and observing that we can still see our new close command. Now, the final thing we need to do before we run our bot is think one more time about the files being created. Our bot is looping through each row of the global sheet and creating files based on what's in the first column, the region column. But if we do that for every row, we'll also be picking up the header row and creating a file called region. There are other ways to avoid making this file, but it would involve commands you haven't learned yet. So instead, let's just add a file delete command at the end of our bot. Head back over to the Actions sidebar and search for the file package. Then, grab a delete command and drag it after our last command. For the specific path, we just need to copy the path from our if command on line 7 again. We'll paste it back into our file delete command, and then we can just delete the $signs around our region variable. This will ensure that we're only deleting the file that's actually called region.xlsx. Now we're ready to run our bot. Click Run and let's see what happens. There's not much to watch here because the Excel Basic package works behind the scenes, but while it's running, I'll let you know that this bot can't run multiple times without first deleting all of the regional files. If you need to run this bot again, be sure to delete all of the files from your CD17 folder except the global sales data file before running it, or you'll get some strange behavior. Anyway, now that the bot's done, let's minimize Chrome and look at our CD17 folder on the desktop. Inside, we'll see our global sales data file, but we'll also see 7 other files, one for each region inside of the global file. Let's open up any of those files. We should see 2 columns, with headers of country and total revenue, and then some data in each of those columns. If we were to go look at the global file, we would be able to match up each of these entries to the same region as the file that we stored it in. Looks like everything went off without a hitch. Great work! And that's it. Now you know the basic details of the Excel Basic package. How to open, close, and save files after getting or setting data into cells. We also learned about how to go to both specific cells as well as how to set the active cell and move to different cells relative to it. Just remember to be careful with your session names, since they have to be unique to the file you're working on or it'll cause problems.
Hey everyone, thanks for watching. For more RPA training, check out the next video here, or watch everything in order right here. Subscribe to my channel for updates on new content, and become a patron to get access to personalized RPA support. But until next time, I'm Jordan at Afterburner Automation, and I hope this helps you build better bots.